In 1961, the association had changed its name to Kenya Hospital Association and opened the hospital's doors to African and Asian patients. Dr. Chris OBURA was the first African to be allowed to practice at the Nairobi hospital, a breakthrough that marked the beginning of acceptance of African and other local practitioners by the hospital.
I remember early '65, I had a European patient coming to see me at the King George VI Hospital for consultation. He had been advised to go to Guy's Hospital to have a very difficult wisdom tooth removed. And when he heard that I had been qualified at Guy's, he decided to come and consult me, because if he could have it removed here, it would be better than wait for 6 months before he goes on leave. So I felt this was a beautiful opportunity to break the glass ceiling, as it were. So I admitted him at Princess Elizabeth Hospital, and of course they couldn't stop me from operating at the time. And then the ice was, at least the ice was broken. My own colleagues were not allowed until later, from probably 68, 69, that other Kenyan surgeons or physicians were allowed to use the hospital.
Dr. OBURA was a pace setter for countless other practitioners who have been instrumental in developing the Nairobi Hospital as the leading healthcare organization in the region. He would later become a board member of many professional organizations, including the East African Dental Association and the Medical Practitioners and Dentists Board, and end up serving for more than 10 years as chairman of the Kenya Hospital Association.
When I came in '61, I was told that Nairobi Hospital is out of bounds for you, both as a surgeon and as a patient. We were not allowed here. I think over the years, there were 1 or 2 specialties where there were no Mazungus to do that job. Like there was an ENT, ear, nose, throat surgeon. He left the country because he did not think that he could stomach a black government. He openly said this. He said, I'm leaving this country because I don't think I want to stay. But by '64, '65, things rapidly changed. The name of the hospital was First European Hospital, and then they decided it has to be a non-racial name, and so they made it a Nairobi Hospital.
Kenya finally attained independence on December 12, 1963, with Jomo Kenyatta as first Prime Minister. The following year, the country became a republic and Kenyatta her president. Among the challenges that the new government faced was improvement of health services for the African majority population. Much effort went into upgrading the King George VI Hospital, which in 1964 was renamed the Kenyatta National Hospital. The government also expanded training facilities for nurses and doctors, including setting up a medical school in conjunction with the University of Nairobi. By implication, the new government of an independent Kenya had no resources to spend on the expansion of the Nairobi Hospital, which at the time was still considered a European hospital. The Kenya Hospital Association would be left on its own to take care of the hospital and make sure that it grew to cope with the changed political and economic circumstances in which it had to operate. During the next decade, it would do just that. In 1966, relying on resources gained from the sale of property, the Kenya Hospital Association was able to reduce the ward fees at the Nairobi Hospital in order to encourage more local people to use its facilities. In 1969, it bought the Laboratory of Clinical Medicine that was operating from Matron House, present-day Jubilee Insurance House, in the center of the city and moved it to the hospital premises. This greatly improved the efficiency of the hospital's diagnostic procedures. The following year, it installed a 4-bed intensive care unit, or ICU, in its St. George's ward. And in 1973, the hospital acquired a blood counter computer capable of giving quick and accurate blood count results, the first of its kind in Kenya. In 1974, the hospital opened its North Wing, which, because of its first-class facilities and 5-star accommodation, was sometimes referred to as the Hilton on the Hill. It had been built to that high standard, partly in anticipation of providing treatment for the aging and ailing President Jomo Kenyatta. President Kenyatta did, in fact, end up at the North Wing that year, but was discharged after treatment. He died 4 years later on August 22, 1978, and was laid to rest at Parliament Grounds. He was succeeded by his Vice President, Daniel Arap Moi. 3 months after the death of President Kenyatta, the first kidney transplant in Africa, outside South Africa, was performed at the hospital by a team of local doctors led by Professor Nelson Awori of the University of Nairobi. Before the operation, the patient, a 10-year-old girl called Chepkorkor Lokoikor, nicknamed Coco, had been on a modern kidney machine that the hospital had acquired a few months earlier, which, together with the ultra-modern equipment, was used to monitor her condition during the operation. Interestingly, Professor Awori and his team performed the kidney transplant at the Nairobi hospital shortly after the first surgeon in Africa to carry out a successful heart transplant, South Africa's Dr. Christian Barnard, paid a visit to Kenya as a guest of the country's then Attorney General Charles NJONJO. NJONJO would soon thereafter become the first African chairman of the board of the Kenya Hospital Association, succeeding Richard Richmond, who had served as chairman since 1974. NJONJO went on to serve as chairman of the association until 1990, the longest any chairman has served.
I was the first African chairman of Nairobi Hospital, and that was something because in a boardroom like this, here was just one African. All the others were just Europeans. Some were sympathetic, John Jack Block, and some others were they also suffered their own setbacks as Jews. And although, I mean, Jews generally were Europeans, so they didn't. But there were times they were reminded they were Jews, you know. You know, this is not for Jews now, this is for British people and so on. But those people made me welcome, and generally the others, you know, just tolerated me. But they found it very difficult to do anything, because if it was argument, I argued with them. If it was contribution in the debate, I made my own contribution, and if they were wrong, I told them, yeah, no, I don't think that is correct. You know, at that time, you know, they just decided, here is a man who is a barrister at law, and qualified in England, and lived in England. This man knows all our habits and all our secrets and all our... this is the man that we should first try as the chairman of the... You know, he's really, apart from his skin, he's really one of us.
It was while NJONJO was chairman that in 1980, an outbreak of Marburg disease in Nairobi brought a number of patients to the Nairobi hospital. While treating one of the patients, Dr. Shem Musoke, one of the hospital staff, caught the disease and was himself admitted for treatment by Dr. David Silverstein. Dr. Musoke eventually recovered, but the incident led to the closure of the hospital to patients for several weeks, in an effort to successfully contain the disease. The closure cost the hospital more than £20,000, but it also put it on the international medical map and enhanced its reputation due to the successful handling of the outbreak. On New Year's Eve 1980, a bomb went off at the Norfolk Hotel, one of the leading tourist hotels in the country. The Nairobi hospital admitted 37 victims of the bombing. 20 of the victims were treated for minor injuries, while 2 were dead on arrival. Those behind the bombing were never discovered, but the hotel was owned by the Bloch family, who were of Jewish origin, and it was thought that the terrorists were extremist anti-Jewish Arabs trying to take revenge against Israel's anti-Palestinian activities. Incidentally, the leading member of the Bloch family, Jack Bloch, was closely associated with the hospital, having been chairman of the Kenya European Hospital Association from 1959 to 1965. It was also while NJONJO was chairman that the Kenya Hospital Association required that all doctors with visiting, admitting rights to the hospital treat the hospital's staff free of charge. In return, doctors could claim 1 month's free hospitalization in a year. Gradually, because more and more of the hospital's nurses were getting married, it was agreed that their immediate family too could be included in the free treatment scheme. In 1982, the hospital entered into an agreement with Mr. John Lee to establish a mortuary run by Lee Funeral Services Limited on a portion of the hospital's property. Lee Funeral Home, which was completed 4 years later, would become one of the busiest in the country. Under Jeremy Watkins Pitchford, the Nairobi hospital also installed its first computerized axial tomography scanner, ultrasound machines, as well as a cobalt source for radiotherapy. In addition, a new block for the pathology department, a dialysis unit to handle renal cases, and more consulting rooms for doctors were built. These developments had the effect of attracting more doctors to the hospital. By 1988, for instance, besides its own staff of 14 full-time doctors, the 194-bed hospital was regularly used by more than 300 private doctors, the largest number of private doctors to be associated with any hospital in East Africa. Despite these improvements, however, the hospital ran into major financial problems. By 1988, bad debts had accumulated to more than 30 million Kenya shillings, mostly owed by the government, parastatals, private companies, diplomatic missions, and multinational companies, whose staff used the hospital's facilities on credit arrangements. The hospital would have closed due to this enormous debt, were it not for the introduction of strict control measures by the then chief accountant, Denise D'Souza. D'Souza asked for deposits on admission from non-urgent cases, expanded the accounts department, and installed a financial controller to help chase up bad debts. By 1991, when Charles NJONJO was succeeded as chairman of the Kenya Hospital Association by another African, David Ndungi, and Watkins Pitchford retired to be succeeded by Mrs. Bronwyn Diamond, the hospital's financial situation had stabilized. Mrs. Diamond was the hospital's first chief executive with a formal professional training and experience in modern hospital administration, as well as the first and only female chief executive the hospital had had.
She was very dynamic, and she was action-oriented, and she would spot talent and not let it go. She's the one who, you know, casualty was over here, where the CEO's office is. And so she would come through that door and come through casualty. And one of the things that she said impressed her, I guess, was when she would come, she would always find us doing things, either learning or acting on something, but she was impressed by what she saw. And she realized it was too constrained an area, and she wanted to move it out. So she said it is not her, it's us, the departmental people who are there. And this is one of the things that I always think is very useful for people to own something. When we were building that new A&E, we all played a big role as staff to get it going, to collect money, to sell tickets, to do whatever it would take to get it there. And she was very determined. She would take a back seat and say, so we agree what we are going to say, but she puts you front so that you own it and so that even other people outside can see really the need is there.
Mrs. Diamond was chief administrator of the Nairobi hospital for only 4 years, but within that time, a number of major developments took place at the hospital. In 1991, a new hearing center was opened with a grant from the Giants Group. The following year, the hospital's pharmacy department was computerized, a library was opened, and the hospital opened the region's first hydrotherapy pool donated by the League of Friends of the Nairobi Hospital. Other major improvements of the hospital's facilities that were undertaken while Mrs. Diamond was administrator included the establishment of a High Dependency Unit, HDU, in May 1992. And in 1993, the hospital acquired a Coulter counter machine at a cost of 6 million Kenya shillings for its laboratory, and also formulated a human immune virus HIV policy, the first of its kind in Kenya. But perhaps the biggest news of the year was the performance at the hospital of its first 2 open-heart surgeries using a surgical program pioneered by one of the hospital's senior surgeons, Mr. John Kamanu Kariuki. Both surgeries were successful. Mr. Kariuki, head of surgery at the Nairobi Hospital, started the hospital's open-heart surgery program and later became the coordinator of the hospital's charitable heart program for children from needy families. In March 1996, 24 Njiri High School students arrived at the hospital's casualty following a bad road accident. It was the largest number of accident casualties the hospital had ever received at any one time, and the labour ward had to be converted into a casualty ward to handle the accident victims. It was clear that the hospital needed to expand its facilities to handle such emergencies. And help would come soon after the accident, when in June that year, President Moi helped raise more than 50 million Kenya shillings for the hospital to build a new accident and emergency unit. 20 million Kenya shillings of the contributions came from businessman philanthropist Manu Chandaria and his family. The unit was thereafter called the Chandaria Accident and Emergency Unit. The following year, more donations would enable the hospital equip its X-ray department with a full range of angiotherapy equipment, making it the only private institution in East and Central Africa with such facilities. Many of these improvements would come in handy when on August 7, 1998, the hospital accident and emergency was swamped within 40